Life is full of contradictions. Sometimes you have to be cruel to be kind. You have to make war to achieve peace. You have to surrender in order to be victorious. And in order to get some rest, some quality rest, you need to work hard. You've got to be disciplined. You've got to carve some time out of your busy schedule and maybe even frantically rush around to get everything done in the lead up to when that time arrives, when you can finally put everything aside and enjoy a well-earned, sweet, blessed rest.
This is Signs of the Times Radio with Kent Kingston.
It's great to have Pastor Lyle Southwell with us from the New South Wales Hunter region. How are you doing, Lyle?
Yeah, doing great. Thanks, Ken.
Excellent. Now, I've asked you to come on the show, Lyle, firstly because, you're with our partner, Faith FM, and Signs of the Times Radio does play on Faith FM a few times every week, so that's,
Absolutely.
That's always great. But also because you are a pastor, you're a Seventh-day Adventist pastor, which means you have a particular interest in the seventh day, or Sabbath, as we call it. And we have this great little article in this month's Signs of the Times called "The Sabbath Community" by A.J. Swoboda. It's actually an extract from a book he's written just recently called "Subversive Sabbath," which is worth checking out if you really do want to get in depth into the issue of Sabbath. But yeah, I just thought it'd be good to have a local perspective, an Aussie perspective on this. So, Lyle, in this particular article, Swoboda suggests that in our society we have a problem where so Swoboda quotes Robert Putnam from his book Bowling Alone, where he famously says that instead of having friends these days, we watch Friends on television, as in, Joey and Jennifer Aniston and all that. It's a bit 90s, but, we get the point, I think.
We still have those on DVD, I think, even though it was back in the 90s. But, this is a really disturbing part of society today, and it kind of links in with something that we've been talking about on Faith FM somewhat, where we've been talking about the JOMO movement. So hashtag JOMO is the opposite of hashtag FOMO, for those of you who might not be familiar with it.
Oh, yeah. So FOMO is fear of missing out. I do know that. JOMO, I haven't come across.
And so what it comes down to is that we live in a world where we are more connected digitally than we've ever been before, but less connected socially than ever before. And there's some interesting research that is that's based around this. If we look at our society right now, in Western society, 1 out of every 4 people in our society are socially isolated.
Yeah, which is incredible. I mean, they say that we've passed the point where more than 50% of the world's population is now living in urban centres. So most of us, the majority of us on planet Earth, are surrounded by people, but yet we feel lonely. What's with that? Yeah,
we're watching Friends and we're watching our friends, but we're not actually connecting with people. We live in a highly individualistic society, a very individualistic culture.
Yeah.
And it's not healthy. It's not healthy at all. It's actually, and this is where the whole JOMO movement has sort of just started to gain ground. There was a lady in Canada who, she didn't actually coin the term, but she wrote the book on it. And so there's a whole book out there on JOMO, which is the joy of missing out, the joy of digitally disconnecting so that you can actually connect with real people, because we have this FOMO thing happening, like, I've always got to check our device and see what comments have been made on our status and respond to it and all that kind of stuff. But we're not actually having real connections with people.
Right. Okay. So, we had the, fast food sort of arrived a few decades ago, but then we saw in response to that, the slow food movement. We said, hey, it's good to take your time over your food, use full natural ingredients, cook it from scratch, sit down, under the al fresco terrace with, fairy lights above you with all your good looking friends and eat food together in that social setting. So this is a similar idea.
Yes, absolutely. So in that setting, you would be one of those times when you put all of your phones in the middle of the table and the first person who touches it pays for the meal.
Yeah. Okay, so
So
the joy of missing out is actually, well, you're missing out on what might be happening on social media, for example, but you're actually not missing out on what's happening IRL, as they say, in real life with those people who are actually in front of you. You're making that effort to connect with them. Yeah, wow. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And it's one of these things you talk about sharing a meal together. And sharing a meal together, the Bible talks about this. Jesus says, I stand at the door and knock, and if anyone opens the door, I want to come in and share a meal with him.
Mm-hmm.
It's not because he's hungry.
Yeah.
It's because he wants to have a relationship. He wants to connect with us. And food is how we connect with other human beings.
Wow.
It's an international language. Food is a language that, anybody can understand anywhere in the world. I've been in places in the world where there are very, very few people that speak English, but when they want to be your friend, the first thing they do is offer you food. They might not be able to speak to you, but they can offer you food. And I've been in countries where people have literally offered me food on the street because they've seen me as a foreigner and as a visitor, and they just want to welcome me to the country. And it's an amazing experience, and you feel really, really special.
Wow.
And, you can go from one end of our world to the other. You can go from one culture to the other. You can go to any region on the earth. When people want to draw close to each other, they do it over food.
Wow.
And so food is incredibly important to that. But then we have to ask ourselves this question: how often do we actually sit down and eat a meal together in our home? Now, there's many different kinds of homes out there. Some people are, they're flatmates or whatever. Others have families and everything in between. But how often do you actually do that?
Yeah.
Without a screen being involved, without all of the different things that just bombard us and disconnect us completely.
Mm-hmm. And there's a certain power involved in sitting there and eating together, isn't there? Because it's not like you have to eyeball people and come up with something to say every 2 seconds, because you've got the food as a focus, and so you can just quietly sit there and enjoy it and have the conversation sort of happen around you, but you then have the opportunity to chip in your 5 cents and to become a part of it. And it's incredible how people will open up in that setting where it's not expected that you're going to spill your guts, but there is an opportunity to perhaps get a little more personal as well as have some fun.
Yeah, and it's the most effective way of relieving social anxiety, particularly for people that are worried about meeting other people, being around in the presence of other people. They're dealing with that kind of stress. Just add food to the mix, and the social anxiety, just tends to disappear out the window.
It's really interesting. When you look at the New Testament, the Book of Acts in particular, this issue of who was eating together with who was a big deal, because of course the Jewish people in those New Testament times had a very firm idea of what made them ceremonially clean or unclean, and they felt that people who weren't of their religion or their nation were unclean, and therefore eating with them would make them, like the Jewish people, unclean. And the Christian teaching and Christian practice sort of began to cut across this, and it became an issue even among those early Christians. The Apostle Peter and the Apostle Paul actually had quite a heated argument about this, apparently, because Peter used to eat with the Gentiles, and then suddenly when some sort of more hardcore conservative Jewish brothers came around, suddenly he stopped doing that, and Paul said, you're such a hypocrite. It's the power of eating together seemed to be a really important thing in those early Christian times.
Yeah, and this really comes back to the article that you've shared on the Sabbath. Because the author here is really looking at how Jewish people do Sabbath, particularly in the city of Jerusalem, and how that you've got this buzz on Friday evening, everybody's getting ready for the Sabbath, and then the sun goes down, this hush falls over the city. And I've been there, and it's actually quite a remarkable thing. It's like the only major city that I've been in that sort of comes to a standstill once a week, and it doesn't come to a standstill because obviously there's lots of Gentiles there, but you go to places like the Wailing Wall, and there is so much joy. And there is so much celebration, and you've got all of these Jewish families that are going home to share a meal together. In the United States, they have this great annual celebration that they call Thanksgiving.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Somehow we managed to import Halloween to Australia without importing Thanksgiving. And Thanksgiving is like the best public holiday ever. But Jewish people, they do that every week on a Friday evening.
Mm-hmm.
What an American family would do once a year, they're doing on a weekly basis. And in our society today, where spending time together like this, quality time in each other's company is so rare, this is actually a really powerful thing. And you mentioned the exclusiveness that existed in the time of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
From my experience, in the city of Jerusalem, it's the complete opposite now. They see you there, you're a tourist, and they're just like, yeah, welcome, we're having so much fun here, join our celebration. And the next minute, you're celebrating with all of these other Jewish people right there in the city of Jerusalem as the sun goes down, as the Sabbath comes in. It's just, if you ever get anyone who's listening in on this, if you ever get the privilege to be there, don't miss Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. It's just fantastic.
Wow, that's really incredible because, I have to admit, I was sort of wondering, yes, we have this problem of disconnection, but I guess I kind of had this perception of, well, Sabbath means kind of withdrawing from the world and going into your house and resting and not working. How is this community? But what you're saying is sort of helping me catch a little bit of a glimpse of the vision of maybe what that's about, what the idea of Sabbath community means.
Yeah, and this was highlighted by Moses in the book of Leviticus, and it's referenced in the article there, Leviticus chapter 23 and verse 3, where the Bible says that the Sabbath is a holy gathering together. Yeah,
a day of sacred assembly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. As a time for for God's people to gather together, to experience community, to be in each other's presence. And what an incredibly powerful antidote to the social disconnectedness that we have in our world today. I was actually looking at some material by a fellow by the name of Dr. Ornish on this, who did some significant research. He says, I'm not aware of any other factor in medicine, not diet, not smoking, not exercise, not stress, not genetics, not drugs, not surgery, that has a greater impact on our quality of life, incidence of illness, and the premature death from all causes than social connectedness.
Wow!
And so this is a book he wrote, Love and Survival: The Scientific Basis for the Healing Power of Intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the researchers, of course, that he looked at was the what's called the Rosetto effect, and this took place in the United States. This was a study that was done in the town of Rosetto in the United States that had half the level of heart disease of any of the surrounding cities.
Oh, wow.
So they wanted to find out why. Why does it have half the level of heart disease? They found that the lifestyles, what people were actually eating, the amount of exercise that they were getting was about the same.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a diet issue. What they discovered was that the city of Rosetto was made up of immigrants from southern Italy, and it was made up of a very tightly knit social networked community.
Right.
Now, as they studied this over a number of years, they found that these were people that they spent time in each other's homes. They intermarried with each other. They connected with each other. They worshipped together on a weekly basis. All these kinds of things. What they noticed was that over time, as multiculturalism took effect and they blended into the rest of American society, over the next 30 years, the heart disease rate caught up to everybody else as the social connectedness disappeared. There's pretty powerful stuff on the power of being socially connected. And the Sabbath, it just gives us that opportunity. Yeah. There is nothing more powerful in the world right now than having a day where you disconnect from the world and connect with each other. And more importantly, do you actually connect with God? Because it's often challenging to stay connected with God in the busy lives we live.
Oh, yeah, ain't that the truth? But yeah, in regards to the research you cited, it's interesting because in Swoboda's article, he actually cites some research that showed that in Jewish communities, mortality rates plummet on the Sabbath. Is the
I found that interesting. I never knew that before.
So these people who are just holding on until Sabbath just to have that celebration with their family and friends, and after Sabbath, and they've sort of had that high day, then I guess the mortality rate returns to how it was before. But yeah,
it says something about the importance of family, and for people who are ill, that having family around, and it just gives them something to live for. And you've got these people, they know, okay, the Sabbath's coming, my family's going to turn up, they're busy during the week, they've got things that they need to take care of, but on the Sabbath my family's going to be here. So I'm not going to die on that day, and they make a decision not to die on that day, and they don't.
Yeah, yeah. It really strikes me, Lyle, that some people say, yeah, I really like the idea of the Sabbath. I can see how we need that in our completely crazy, busy, lifestyles that we have today. But they say, you know what, it actually suits me best to have my Sabbath every Tuesday. So I take that time aside to do some reading and to, do a rest from my usual work. And someone else says, well, for me it's Thursday. And for someone else says, well, for me it's Sunday, But I guess what I'm picking up from what you're saying is that there is a certain power in having this corporate day off. It's not this individualistic, I need to break this day, it's convenient for me to take a break that day, but it's this family together, community together, faith community together, all worshipping on one, particular day.
That's right. The only way you're ever going to get the benefit from the Sabbath that the Bible promises, and this is the Sabbath blessing,
or the full benefit, perhaps.
The full benefit from it is by, let's say you choose to have your Sabbath on Tuesday. Well, that means that then your whole family is going to have to make the same choice. That's not realistic. Then if you, along with that, then your whole worship community is going to have to make that same choice. And once again, that's not realistic. And so then, it really comes down to the weekend, and this is where, you've got, as a Seventh-day Adventist, of course, we worship on the Sabbath, the seventh-day Sabbath day. And there used to be a time when Christians who worshipped on Sunday would have, a lot of the same sense of community, because they would actually take Sunday off as a day of rest and worship.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because there is a move in Europe, I believe, in particular, and I think a recent papal encyclical, was it Laudato Si, actually upheld this idea of a weekly Sabbath, meaning Sunday, of course, and there is a push by some Catholic leaders and Catholic laity to encourage governments to enshrine Sabbath within the national law, so that the entire community can take a rest. And this is the sort of thing that they're trying to encourage trade unions to support, governments to support, churches and other community groups to support. Can you see where they're coming from?
Absolutely, they're trying to provide for the mental health of their community and build good society. And just my producer here just returned from a couple of months in Poland, and talking about how frustrating it was in Poland, because on Sunday everything closed, and you're like, oh, let's go, oh, but it's closed. Oh, let's go do this. Oh, but it's closed. Everything was closed.
Yep.
Yeah, because this is a country that's 90% Roman Catholic, and of course they've embraced this. Well, anecdotally, there was a lot of frustration with the average person on the street that everything's closed on Sunday, but as a government, they've certainly embraced this concept wholeheartedly to try and bring back some of this lost aspect of the Sabbath. Having said that, I still find that it is far removed from God's original intention with the Sabbath. People tend to today just sort of see, well, okay, I can't go to work this day, so they fill the day with something else other than community and worship with God, and it sort of defeats the purpose.
Oh, interesting. You mentioned, as a Seventh-day Adventist, you observe Sabbath on Saturday, the seventh day of the week. Do you have any concerns about governments actually upholding a particular day? I mean, we've agreed that it's good for a community to rest together, but at what point does that actually become, I guess, a human rights issue, where one religious group, wants to worship on a particular day and another religious group wants to worship on another particular day?
It becomes a religious liberty issue when I am now no longer able or allowed to worship on the day that I and my church community chooses. So, for instance, if you are, some countries have gone down this path and, could very easily come to us here in Australia. Our religious liberty here in Australia is actually on a very fragile basis, which is why we've got, Philip Ruddock looking into it at the moment, because we actually don't have a legal framework for it.
At a federal level, I think different states have different levels of religious freedom protection, but I think you're right. At a federal level, it's a little weak. I mean, there are things in the Constitution, of course, but which have been
reinterpreted a number of times over the years, so they've sort of become a toothless tiger. But that aside, we if somebody makes a law that we're not going to open businesses on Sunday. It's not going to affect me in any way whatsoever at all.
Really? Really? I mean, I've thought about that, because if for example, you are a observant Jew, or you are a Seventh-day Adventist who keeps the seventh-day Sabbath, you read the commandment that says, 6 days shall you labor, and the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. And you say, well, according to the commandment, I'm supposed to work on 6 days. So if I'm going to do some work, some carpentry at home, or if I'm going to go into my shop on a Sunday and do some work in there, am I going to be prosecuted? I mean, do you think people who are concerned about religious freedom and freedom of conscience should oppose the idea of standard, trading hours? And should we be pushing for open trading hours, or are there other issues involved? I know this gets difficult and political, but what do you think?
Sure. Yeah. No, I support open trading hours and freedom for everybody. I guess what I'm saying is that it's not going to infringe on my religious liberty if businesses are closed on Sunday. I have every freedom to still work on that day. If the law comes in and says, okay, businesses are closed on Sunday and you are not allowed to work on that day, if you switch your angle grinder on Sunday, there's going to be a problem. Then that's definitely starting to infringe on my religious liberty. The danger that I see is that once you go down this path, because it is legislation that is driven by religion, and this is my issue here, and this is my issue with what's taking place in Poland and other countries like this. This is not being driven by secular governments. This is being driven by the Roman Catholic Church. And so it's a religious agenda that makes it a religious law, and we should not be legislating people's conscience. The next step, of course, is, okay, businesses have to close on Sunday, but then the next step is enforcing, people to actually worship on Saturday, which of course, for Jews, for myself, and for some other religious groups would be a day of worship, or for Friday for Muslims, or whatever it might be.
Yep.
Then that becomes a major problem, because now I'm not able to worship God according to my conscience and according to what the Bible teaches.
Yeah. Okay, look, fair enough. I mean, that aside, so when it comes to you and your family, Lyle, I just wanted to sort of get a mental picture of what Sabbath means for you and for your family and for your religious community. How do you practice Sabbath?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Of course, my family's kind of grown up and left home now, and we're living in the individualistic society that we live in today.
Sure.
Particularly in Western countries, we don't have that same level of community that you might have in a Jewish community in Jerusalem.
Okay, we'll start off by giving us a picture of perhaps how it was when your kids were younger and you all, before they got their P plates and started sort of zooming all over the place. How was it then?
Yeah, sure. So Friday evening, we always had a special meal. Friday evening was our pastry evening. We would always go and either make or buy something, some sweet thing made from, pastry. And there was no biblical background to that. It was just like, well, we'll just do this once a week and let's do it on Friday. That's a great way to start the Sabbath. And it makes it different. A little bit of a family tradition just makes things different and special.
Okay, and so similar to the article that says, it begins, Jerusalem can get a little crazy on a Friday night, and it mentions that Sabbath, does start on Friday night at sunset. That's the same practice that your family has been observing. Yeah,
absolutely. So we observe it according to what the Bible says, right there in Leviticus 23, about from sundown to sundown.
Okay,
is when it says. So yes, and so the great thing is that with that system, of course, is that you get to relax that whole evening, and then you start the next day, being Saturday, in a relaxed frame of mind. So Friday evening, family gathers round. We have a different meal, something special. We have a different worship. We have family worship, but on a different level. We'd often play, some Bible games. Have a family have a Bible quiz, whatever it might be. We would have a longer, more extensive worship. Sometimes, if it was. We might light up the candles or something or other like that. Just as you'll often see actually in a Jewish home.
Okay, and in that JOMO sense, the joy of missing out, are there any aspects of Sabbath that you decide to, hey, we're switching off to this, we're switching off to that? Has that been a part of Sabbath for your family?
Oh, absolutely. So the screens would definitely switch the screens off at the start of Sabbath. I guess I was a little bit fortunate because the whole screen addiction wasn't as big when my kids were that age is what it is now.
Yeah.
And I definitely think that it's a valuable time to switch the screens off and to spend time with each other.
Okay.
But that's the start of the Sabbath, and then of course, because it begins at sundown, it gives you an opportunity to have a restful evening, to have a restful night, to actually get a decent night's sleep.
So
it went from midnight to midnight.
An early night could be part of the deal, hey?
Yeah, because you get that buzz that's happening, like, I've got to get all this stuff done before Sabbath. Right? And so you have that buzz on Friday, which you get in Jerusalem. If it went from midnight to midnight, that buzz would go up until midnight.
Yeah, that'd
because you've got to get, it's like the buzz that you get before Christmas. Everything has to get done before Christmas, and all the tradies just work to the fingernails.
Yep. So preparing that special meal, and as well, I guess, like getting the house clean and that sort of stuff. Yep.
And so we wouldn't involve ourselves with sporting events or that kind of entertainment. We wouldn't involve ourselves with doing business, going shopping. Make sure the car's filled up with fuel, all that kind of stuff, so that when the Sabbath comes, you can actually disconnect.
Right. Okay.
You can actually do that whole JOMO thing and disconnect properly, because it's pretty hard to disconnect if you're just doing the same thing as you do any other day of the week, apart from church.
Okay. All right. So you do go to church on Saturday, do you?
Yeah, so Saturday morning is when we go to church, either 9:30, 10 o'clock, whatever, whenever the church starts. And, that's a time for corporate worship. And one of the things that, as a pastor, I've really emphasized is that every Sabbath worship should also include food. Because as we talked earlier about the power of food and the power of community and the power of social connectedness, that's where you get your social connectedness. You don't get your social connectedness sitting on a pew listening to a sermon.
Yeah, yep.
Now, of course, the thing I enjoy most about the worship service is actually the small group Bible study that takes place before the main service.
Yep.
That's what you get, so much social connection there on a really deeply spiritual level, where you're interacting with the other members. And I find that some people will miss that early morning small group Bible study, and as a result of that, I think they're missing out on the best part of the whole day.
Okay.
And the real spiritual community part of what's taking place.
Yeah, okay. And look, I grew up Seventh-day Adventist, and for me, a really large, awesome part of Sabbath was that you'd often get invited out to someone's house for lunch, or you would invite people home to your life, so you have a chance to get to know people and make new friends. Has that been part of your practice?
Yeah, absolutely. Less so in more recent times. And so what I've noticed is that culture has disappeared somewhat, which is a real tragedy. And so what we've done is replace it by having food at church in the hall after the worship service every Sabbath. And I think that should be a non-negotiable for all churches, because that provides for that whole time to connect on a
eating
on a
together,
level.
building community.
Together,
yeah.
And you'll often find that 3-4 o'clock in the afternoon, everybody's still sitting around just enjoying each other's company.
Wow, that sounds awesome. And is there time for actual rest, actual bit of a sleep there, perhaps after that? The food coma kicks in.
Well, the Bible does talk about resting according to the commandment, Ken. And if that's what you need, and in today's society where people do work long hours,
and don't get enough sleep,
pressure,
that blue light on screens late at night, it often wrecks our sleeping patterns, doesn't it?
Yep, people really, really need a Sabbath. And when you actually take a Sabbath and you keep it, according to what the commandment says, as a day of rest and as a day where you disconnect from the world, where, when work things come up, you just don't even go there. And you've got this on a weekly basis. For the average person out there that doesn't have it, it is just a mind-blowing experience to really, really experience the true blessing of the Sabbath. And it's just like, wow. Yeah. And I get this once a week. The government gives us a public holiday, once a year when Australia Day comes around, or whatever it might be, Anzac Day or some other day. And God's like, you know what? I'm going to give you a public holiday once a week.
Sounds fantastic. Hey, thanks so much, Lila. Really appreciate those insights, and thanks for being a part of Signs of the Times Radio this week.
Absolute pleasure, Ken. We always appreciate what you have to share with us, both on Signs of the Times and, of course, when you jump on with us on Faith FM.
Today's episode was based on an article appearing in this month's Signs of the Times magazine. A subscription is just $26 for 11 issues a year. To find out more, visit signsofthetimes.org.au. Signs of the Times has been published in Australia since 1886 and is proudly produced by Adventist Media.
This is an Adventist Media podcast.